Hello. This is Derek from One River Tea. Welcome back to another episode of Tea Soup, a podcast all about tea culture, life in modern China, and Chinese tea. I'm your host, Derek Poskin. I've been living in China since 2016, and I've been drinking, buying, and selling Chinese tea for the past decade. So, pop on that kettle, heat up your teaware, and let's get this session started. Alright. So in this episode, what I want to do is I want to continue this discussion about white tea production regions, particularly in Fuding, in northern Fujian. And to recap those real quick from the last episode I talked about Diantou and Panxi. This episode, I want to get deeper into it. I want to talk again about Taimushan, which you probably heard in the second episode, and Bailin, which I've barely mentioned so far. And then in the next episode after this one, I will talk about up further north, where we have Guanling. And Guanling, in my opinion, makes kind of a majority of the lower quality tea that I'm not a very big fan of, but it's still with the Da Bai Hao varietal. And again, the reason I really like Fuding white tea is because they all use the Da Bai Hao cultivar. Sorry, not varietal. The Da Bai Hao cultivar is actually two different cultivars, the Da Bai number 1 and the Da Hao number 2, and these are mixed together. And it was actually in this Taimushan plot that I discovered this for the first time. Now, if you listen to episode 2, The History of White Tea, then you'll recognize the word Taimushan. And it's so funny because today I was talking to a Chinese person who runs a coffee house, one of my friends, and I was telling them about Taimushan, and they said, "What Shan?" And I'm like, "Taimushan. Shan means mountain." And they were like, "Where is it?" And I'm like, "It's in Fuding." And they're like, "I've never heard of it." And I wrote it out for them. They've never seen it. And I'm like, "It's the birthplace of white tea." And they're like, "Look at this. This guy knows more about tea than I do." And I'm just like, anyways, now you know more about tea than she does. I'll tell her next time. Anyways, Taimushan is the mythic birthplace of white tea. This is where we have the old lady living at the base of the mountain in prehistory under the mythic emperor Yao. And she was healing people with sun-dried tea. And after her death, they renamed the mountain from Sai Mountain into Taimushan Mountain, or Taimushan, which means Grandmother Mountain. And it is here where white tea was born that I kind of want to begin this story and kind of get into it, because I organized a trip to Taimushan into this region with a lot of foreign friends in 2021. And just as I did in the last episode, where we kind of look at Panxi and Diantou through the lens of my sourcing trip and through the lens of Qiu, this time I want to go a different route and look at Taimushan and Bailin through the eyes of a tea tour and through the eyes of Zhang and his partner, Jinzhi. So to connect the narrative thread between this episode and the last episode, I know Zhang through Qiu. They're actually really good friends. When I went down to visit Zhang in October of this year, I guess last year now, in 2022, I hung out with Zhang for about a week and Jinzhi for about a week, and I learned a lot about them. But I also hung out with Qiu, and we all ate dinner together. We all drank tea together. We all walked around Diantou together. And the way it kind of works is I'm actually the same age as Zhang. We'll get into this later. Really weird, but Qiu is kind of, a mentor to Zhang. And so what happened is I wanted to do a tea tour with Qiu, who I knew, and I talked to him about it the first time I met him, the second time, and we organized it for 2021 in April. But the week that I had everyone coming there, Qiu got really sick. And Qiu was like, "I really can't do this tea tour. I'm so sorry. Here's my friend Zhang who can do the tea tour, and you can go up to his Taimushan plot. I've already talked to him about it. It'll all be fine." But it's really interesting because a lot of times when I'm sourcing tea, a lot of people are really protective about me, where they don't want me to talk to other producers. They don't want me to talk to other farmers, and they try and keep me in the dark as much as they can. But here Qiu is just openly saying, "Here's another guy who makes really excellent tea, and why don't you introduce all of your foreign friends to him?" And I'm just like, okay. It seems like everyone's just very open here, but I think it's just between Cho and Zhang, and I mentioned this last episode where I don't really think Cho needs me to buy tea from him. Cho just really likes sharing the wealth of Fuding white tea with a lot of people, and I guess that's enough. So I organized the trip with Zhang real quick, and this is a few days before all my friends arrive. And I plan a few days with my friends where they all come to Fuzhou, and then from Fuzhou we go to Taimushan. We hike Taimushan, the scenic part of the mountain, and then we meet in Fuding, and Zhang takes us up to the Taimushan plot where we can harvest tea ourselves. He'll take us to his factory, and he'll show us how he makes tea. And so these tea tours kind of reflect the way I'm structuring this podcast episode and the way I structured the last one and the next one, because it's all about connecting with the tea in your cup in a deeper, more meaningful way. Because just drinking a tea is not enough to really understand its true place in the world, its place in society, its place in culture. Because with tea, you have people that are living in totally different worlds, eating different diets, practicing different lives, and they're the ones that are making this tea. And so to drink the tea without knowing anything about them or their culture, maybe you know their name, maybe you know the name of the mountain, the region it was made, when it was picked, but what do you really know about the culture behind this tea? Because as we know, the tea reflects the people reflect the tea. It's always an exchange. There's always this give and take. You know how water shapes things and can also take the shape of things. So too do we shape our environment, and we take the shape of our environment. It's this conversation. And so too when drinking tea, when we're putting the substance into our body and we're indelibly connecting with this other side of the world, this other culture, if you don't know the other culture you're connecting with, then you're losing a huge portion of this whole conversation that happens when you drink tea. And so, as for me, I love the idea of these tea trips, and this is one of the first one I had planned, this white tea trip to Fuding, and I was so eager to do it, to show people the places, the cultures, the foods and languages, and everyone behind the tea that they're drinking. But this idea is kind of stagnated because of the unending COVID complications of 2020 and 2021 and 2022. But it seems like in 2023... cross your fingers, it seems like China's finally opening up, and they're doing away with a lot of these COVID restrictions, so there's this light at the end of the tunnel of the dream for me. And so to take a brief tangent here, I want to talk about some of the other tea trip ideas that we've already been laying the groundwork for. Because as I said, we've been living in China for 6-7 years now, and we've been visiting these places almost every year, making connections with some really wonderful farmers that are really hospitable and really just eager to share their culture and share their teas with the world. So the first one and the topic of this episode is all about the white tea trip, which I'll tell you more of the details about it, but really quick, you hit Fuzhou, you climb Taimushan, you eat Fujianese cuisine, you hike Taimushan Mountain for the tea garden, you pick tea, and you learn how to process this tea. And this is one of my favorite ones. Usually happens in April. That's the best time. The weather is just a dream in this northern coastal Fujian. The second one is one that Alex is really excited about, and I'm very excited about it too, because we've actually rented a whole cabin and a few acres of tea fields up in this very rural area of Hubei. This is in Hefeng County, and Hefeng County historically and by numbers has been the poorest county in Hubei for a very long time. They were the last ones to complete their poverty eradication act that the government wanted them to do. They've recently, I think in the 80s, finally built a road through the mountains that connects them with the rest of the world. And so it was really great to find this Lo Shui Yuan tea cooperative and start working with them, because they have a lot of beautiful land. They're really, really isolated, and they're so friendly and so kind, and they're really struggling to get their teas outside of this tiny village and outside China even, because what we're doing is we're helping them sell their teas online. This is both domestically and internationally, because we're helping them run their Taobao store, which is essentially Chinese Amazon, because they don't understand the fulfillment service. They don't know how to ship the teas and do it all online and whatnot. And so what we've also done is we've rented we've leased a old Tuja minority wooden cabin that's built entirely without nails on top of the mountain, and with that, 3 acres of tea fields that we go and we weed and we try and harvest every year, but we've never managed to get a single harvest yet because we just don't pick enough. And so this would be a great opportunity for anyone who's really adventurous, anyone who's willing to do some woofing, to do some weeding, to do some work, because it's really cool. It's really isolated. You'll feel like you're unplugged from the world. And the neighbors are so friendly. Like the popo, like the grandma next door, she'll come by and she'll plant vegetables for us and help us harvest them. And if we're hungry, she'll cook us food. So it's a beautiful place, but it's a little more for the adventurous person. This is in Hubei, which is actually Western Hubei, which is very close to Western Hunan, which has the Avatar Mountains, the Hallelujah Mountains that you would see in James Cameron's first Avatar. This is the Zhang, and they're also a very big Tujia minority culture in that area. So a lot of cool things to see in this rural Hubei. The third tea trip at the moment would be a Dansong Oolong tea trip, which I think a lot of people would be excited about. As you know, I lived in Chaozhou for all of 2021, and I know a lot of tea makers, tea potters, tea houses, essentially anyone who's doing tea in the area. I've met a lot of them. And so what we could do is we could study how to make Chaozhou Juni teapots with my teacher Min. He has this experience center where you can learn how to throw, you can fire your piece, and you can also just see how they're doing it in their studios. We could also go up to the mountains. There's this 1,000 acres of 100-year-old plus tea trees that we can walk through. I know a few people up in that area who can show you how to pick it, how to make it, how to taste it, and whatnot. And in that area, there's also the Tianchi, which is like the Heaven Lake. And you can camp up here on the mountaintop. You can rent a tent. You can boil tea all night. And you can watch the sunrise. And usually what happens is there's the sea of clouds. And so the sun rises over the sea of clouds. And then when the sun burns up the clouds, you see blue mountains receding into the distance. And it all just feels like a Chinese painting. It's really ridiculous where it's like, oh, the Chinese painters just copied what they saw. It's that easy, I guess. And so that would be a cool thing. Chaozhou food is really one of the most famous foods in China. So is Fujianese food, though. So the fourth option would be the Biluochun tour, and this is right by Suzhou. I met this young kid. He's a college student, I believe, and he's been living on the mountain, on and off the mountain, in the middle of the lake for all his life. And his parents make tea every year. I think Dylan from the Sweetest Dew actually met him one time, and they picked tea together and learned how to make it and stuff. So that would be really cool because it's easy to get to. It's really close to the Suzhou city. You can spend a day in the Suzhou experiencing the height of Jiangsu culture, the elegant history mixed with the economic success of a tech giant in the region. You can see the Great Pants building, which is amazing and kind of silly. You can also really quickly go to the island where you can pick the green teas, you can roll it, you can learn how to make it all in a walk. There's a Buddhist temple there, there's a mountain you can climb, and just some really cool stuff. It'd be easier for like a day or a 2 trip. So anyways, to bring it all back, let's talk about the very first tea trip I ever organized, which was a pretty good success, even though I made zero monies off of it. But, you know, it's all about drinking tea with friends and learning the process and whatnot. But I did put a lot more work into it than I kind of got out of it, maybe, just because I could have gone there by myself and had a great time. Instead, I was trying to organize 11 different people with all of this, like four vegetarians and stuff, which actually, let's talk about it, because we're in Fuzhou. Fuzhou is a really cool city. So all my friends who have been living in China for a while, they've been to the Great Wall, they've been to Bailin, they've been to a lot of these, you know, standard places you would go to when you're in China. They get to Fuzhou and they feel the culture, they feel the history, and they all kind of express this idea like Fuzhou is a really cool city and has this feeling of antiquity. And I was doing some research. Apparently they were finding Neolithic remains in Fuzhou since like 5000 BC. And so there has been culture there. There have been people living there for ancient times. And so you have the feeling where nowhere you can go somebody hasn't ever been before. Does that make sense? Somebody's every stretch. How can I say this? every square foot has probably been trod by a human being in history in Fuzhou. The city walls have been built and rebuilt, demolished and rebuilt, and so they just build it on top of each other and get progressively taller until like the Song Dynasty. And so there's this really cool place in Fuzhou called the 3 Lanes and 7 Alleys, and it's essentially just this huge ancient city block. And so a lot of the buildings have the feeling of being old. Some of them are rebuilt. I remember we're all laughing at this McDonald's that just has this really, really epic, like Chinese, ancient Chinese vibe to it, but then you realize it's a McDonald's. And then across the street, there's a KFC, so it has this feeling where it's like, okay, like maybe that's quite fake, but the feeling is still fun. And so what's cool about Fuzhou is it's very close to Taiwan, very close to Taipei, and you see a lot of crossovers. Like one of the famous street foods in Fuzhou is this oyster pancake, which is really popular in Taiwan. Apparently this oyster pancake came to a guy in a dream. I was reading the origin myth of that, and it's some guy was really poor and he was like, what can I do to make money? He saw the sun setting on a bed of clouds and it's like, oh, that's like an egg that's been deep fried, and he woke up and he made this oyster pancake. That's how the Fujianese say what happened. So it also has a bunch of night alleys where you can go and buy a lot of cool stuff, and has that kind of night alley, night market vibes you would get in Taipei. We actually managed to find a really nice vegetarian buffet in this alley. It seemed like it was like this old temple. We walk in and it's just a really nice vegetarian buffet, which was good because I think we had 4 vegetarians with us at the time. So all in all, Fuzhou is a really nice city with a little bit of that old feeling, a little bit of the new feeling. But really, I know what you guys are here for, and we'll get there. Let's go to the tea mountain. So we all go back to the hotel and get up early in the morning for a train to Taimushan. And again, this is that train I talked about a few episodes ago, where you go up the coast from Fuzhou to Taimushan. It takes like 45 minutes, maybe an hour. And you see the coastal mountains and the estuaries. Sometimes the mountains are on your right, sometimes they're on the left, sometimes they're coming from the sea, sometimes they're green and blue. It's really, really wonderful. And so we do that in the early morning, which just adds to it because you see the sun on the ocean and whatnot. And so we get to the Taimushan train station and realize it's still quite a ways away from the Taimushan Scenic Mountain. And so now we're wondering, how do we get there? Usually in China, what they'll have are tour buses that'll take you, shuttle buses that'll take you from the train stop to, a normal scenic spot. But I guess Taimushan is not that normal. Remember my friend who didn't know Taimushan, even though she saw the words for it. It's not a very popular place. And so what we had to do, and you'll hear this a lot in the future, I promise, and I'll get into it a lot more, I promise. We had to take black cabs. And so black cabs are essentially, they're not taxis. They're not people in Uber. They're just people that are waiting at the train station saying that they can take you anywhere. And this is something that I've done so much in China, I don't even think twice about it, but I would not do this in a lot of places, certainly not in America. But it's you just get into the car with a random person, and they'll take you where you want to go. You agree on the price beforehand, and they never really change it. And so I've had just incredible good luck in China. Really never gotten taken advantage of because you just agree on the price beforehand, you get in the car, and they take you to the place. And so I negotiated it pretty well for the 11 of us. We needed 3 or 4 cars. Luckily, it's kind of like a racket where there's a runner, and then the runner calls his drivers, and then the drivers show up, and then everyone takes a cut of it. And so I essentially get the guy's card because I'm like, we're going to need to get back to the train station eventually as well. So long story short, we get to Taimushan, the mountain. It's wonderful. I think I told you this last time. I love this mountain. It's beautiful, has really soft boulders, and just juts up out of the land like a bunch of bones. And so we hike it. There we do a little bit of rock climbing, and just it's pretty generally nice and fun. If you've never been to a Chinese mountain, it's hilarious because it's just stairs. It's like stairs all the way up. Like there are stairs and there are paths. It's not like hiking through a wilderness, or it's not like a really serious hike. So it's interesting. Anyways, After the Taimushan, we get back to Fuding and we get ready for the next day where Zhang is going to take us up into the Taimushan garden. And it's actually not Zhang's Taimushan garden. This is where I want to talk a little bit about Zhang and his partner, Jinzhi. So as I mentioned earlier, I recently spent a nice week with Zhang and Jinzhi in Fuding, and we ate a lot of hot pot, we ate a lot of food, and just talked a lot. And I learned a lot about them, and I want to explain a little bit about who they are and kind of how I understand things, because Zhang is essentially my age, and his partner is Jinzhi. And I'm calling Zhang by his surname and Jinzhi by her given name because Jinzhi's surname is also Cho. And I just spent a long time, and it's the same exact character. I spent a long time talking about Cho, who's a different person, and they're not related. And so instead of saying Cho Jinzhi, I'll just say Jinzhi because that's also what everyone else calls her. Well, they call everyone Zhang. They call Zhang Lao Zhang, Da Zhang, and they call Jinzhi Jinzhi or Zhizhi. Jinzhi means golden branch, and Zhizhi essentially means twiggy, which actually kind of like fits with her. And golden branch is also a beautiful name for somebody who's born and bred on a mountain, which she was. So Jinzhi has an ancestral plot on Taimushan, on the slopes of Taimushan, and it's here that we're going to go. They actually have a lot of the Saicha varietal, a huge plot of the Saicha varietal, which is the Gongmei varietal. This is the heirloom varietal that's kind of predates the Dabai Hao that's really common. But on Taimushan, they also have one plot of Dabai and one plot of Da Hao, and they pick these and blend them together. So before I get more into the narrative plot of this tea tour, I want to talk about my experiences understanding who Zhang is and who Jinzhi is, and the time I was spending with them last autumn in Fuding, because I found out Zhang's zodiac, his Chinese zodiac, and I found out he's a dragon. And I realized, oh, I'm a dragon too. You must be the same age as me. But he is he is a Taurus, and I'm a Virgo, so he's technically a few months older than me. And in case you didn't catch that, I'm kind of into astrology, and I'm about to hit a pretty big astrology tangent. And so if you don't like astrology, hit that 15-second skip button, 2, 3, we'll see how many times you need. But I want to talk about essentially how I use Chinese zodiac and Western zodiac to understand the tea makers and just connect with them on a whole nother level. I'm really into this idea of personology and, Carl Jung and this idea of archetypes and how we identify with all these other archetypes. And the zodiac systems are just a beautiful way, this immaculate mirror that we can hold up to each other and kind of see what hits and what doesn't hit. And so the Chinese zodiac, for people that don't know, it has the 12 animals, and all the animals happen once a year. And so the Chinese zodiac cycles every 12 years. And so if somebody tells you their Chinese zodiac, you can essentially pinpoint their exact age, give or take 12 years. Because I have a friend who's a rabbit, and I'm like, oh, you're a rabbit. I didn't realize you were 2 years older than me, or a year older than me. And he's like, oh, actually, I'm 13 years younger than you. And I was like, oh, whoops. And so usually what happens is when they say, oh, I'm a dragon, I'm a snake, I'm a monkey, I can be like, oh, you're a monkey. You were 4 years younger than me. That means you were born in this year. Zhang said he was a dragon, and I didn't think he was 12 years older or younger than me. So yes, we're both born in 1988. And Jinzhi is a snake, and the snake comes right after the dragon. In Chinese, they say the dragon is the long, and then the snake is the Shaolong, like the little dragon. So as an extra special part of this tangent, I think I might as well just go on full tilt and tell you the whole story behind the Chinese zodiac. So there are 12 different animals. The animals are the rat, the ox, the tiger, the rabbit, the dragon, the snake, the horse, the goat, the monkey, the rooster, the dog, and the pig. And it happens every year, and it cycles through. Right now, it's actually the day before the year of the rabbit. We're leaving the year of the tiger, I believe. So let me just tell you the whole story behind the myth behind the birthplace of the Chinese zodiac. And this apparently comes from the 5th century BC is when we first start hearing the story of the Great Race. And the Great Race goes like this. It all starts with a Jade Emperor, one of the god kings, even older than all the sage kings and mythic emperors I talked about in episode 2. He wanted to create this cyclical calendar system and wanted different animals to represent the 12 branches. He didn't know which one would come first, which one would come after, and so he organized a big race. And so all the animals had to do was cross a great river and reach the Jade Emperor. Now the story goes like this. The cat and the rat, who were very bad at swimming, decided to ride on the ox's back. The ox, who has a very gentle heart and is very kind to all creatures, said, okay, you can do that. And so the ox starts going across the river with the cat and the rat on the back. Right by the end of the bank, the rat pushes the cat into the river, jumps off and swims to shore, reaching the Jade Emperor first. And the ox is very close behind, being second, and I guess the cat drowns because the cat is not in the Chinese zodiac. Rip. And so after what we wish was the cat, we get the big cat, which is the tiger. And the tiger's third, and the Jade Emperor's like, yo, what happened? And the tiger's like, oh, it was really hard swimming against the currents, I guess. Fourth comes the rabbit, who was hopping from stone to stone. And then fifth comes the dragon, who flies gracefully in. And the emperor's like, why were you so slow? And the dragon's like, oh, I heard people praying for rain, so I had to help them out first. And then we hear the horse coming. But there's a snake coiled on its leg. The horse balks at the last minute in fear of the snake, and the snake slithers across the finish line into an easy 6th place. And the horse comes in 7th. The goat, the monkey, and the rooster worked as a team. The rooster finds a raft, and the goat and the monkey pull it through the weeds. The Jade Emperor was so happy that it just gave everyone. The goat gets 8th, monkey 9th, the rooster 10th. 11th comes the dog, who was probably the actual best swimmer of the lot, but he was playing in the shallows too long and didn't really take it that seriously. And then in last place comes the pig, who had stopped for a meal, had fallen asleep midway through the race, and then gets there right before the race is called. And so the zodiac cycles every 12 years, from mouse to ox to tiger to rabbit to dragon to snake to horse to goat to monkey to rooster to dog, and finally the pig. And here's a point of note. The pig could also be a boar. Sometimes they call it a boar. Sometimes they call it a pig. The rooster a cock. The goat a sheep. The ox a cow. And the rat a mouse. And in this myth, we kind of get the first very shallow glimpse of what these kind of characters, archetypes, could have as people. And so the zodiac cycles every 12 years. And on your zodiac year, something special happens. These can be considered test years. But in my own personal opinion, this is kind of a passing through a threshold on the path of life kind of year. And so if you look at this 12-year cycle, a lot happens incrementally in these times. From 0 to 12, you're an infant, you're a child, you're learning almost everything you'll ever know about the world in this very, very short period of time. And then by the time you're 12, you're ready to move on to something else. You're ready to move on to adolescence. And this is when you're finally starting to look towards the people older than you and trying to figure out what they're doing with their life. What are they spending all their times on? What's going on? And then at 24, this is when you move out of adolescence and you get into young adulthood. And I say young adulthood here because let's face it, who really knows what they're doing when they're 24? I mean, it took me way more than that to figure out what I'm doing. And really, I'm about to hit 36, and this is that transition from young adulthood into what I would say just adulthood. Because when you're 36, this is when you should really be able to find your place in society. You should feel full of your own power. You should be doing something, find your contribution, your path in this world. And then at 48, this is when you're kind of leaving that prime. You have 12 years in this prime state, and then you're kind of leaving it. And then this is when you enter this late adulthood. And then at 60, your 5th zodiac anniversary, this is when you retire from society, live in a cave, and devote yourself to the spiritual practices. Something like that. Or you could just be relaxing and chilling and drinking tea. But again, I haven't kind of gotten to these parts. So like 72, 84, 96. I'm not quite sure what happens. Maybe I'll update this podcast, do another episode when I hit there. But until then, these are just kind of my thoughts at these archetypal stages of life. And this is kind of a long tangent, but Finding out that Zhang was the same age as me put a lot of things into perspective for me because one, we're both at the same age of about to hit another transition in life. We're both dragons nearing that full adulthood mark, each of us finding our place in this world. Ginger is a snake, which in the Chinese zodiac is also called the little dragon, as I mentioned. And while the dragons are the only Chinese zodiac sign that are not real animals, dragon sympathizers, please don't hate me. I mean, maybe they could be real, but they're considered a little mysterious. They're considered magical and usually pretty lucky in their endeavors. Snakes are a little more easily understood. They're considered very intelligent, crafty, changing, and very attractive in kind of a dangerous way sometimes. And in my mind, yeah, Twiggy fits that. Zhang fits that archetype. And so let me tell you a bit about Zhang, realistically. Zhang by trade is a mechanical engineer. He wears round glasses with thick frames. He's a bit tall and gangly, and I would call him scholarly to be polite, maybe a bit of a nerd otherwise. But he's similar to Cho, wherein he wasn't raised as a farmer. He has no generational heritage tea farming, but he's in this industry out of passion. He's already made a lot of money in a joint enterprise with another tea company, but he's since sold his shares and rebranded with something a lot smaller, something that is under his personal control. Well, that of his and Ginger's. Now, enter Ginger, Twiggy. She is a born and raised Taimushan native. And so she has this beautiful plot, as I mentioned, up on Taimushan, which we'll go to here in a second, I promise. And that has the Sai Cha, the Gongmei, the Dabai Hao. And it's really, really wonderful because she's very, very much of the earth, where Zhang is kind of a bit removed. And so now here it is. Here's the moment of payoff for that super long tangent wherein I talk about astrology, I talk about animals, I talk about all these ways I'm understanding people because I see this in their partnership. I can see their zodiac signs reflected perfectly in the way they do business. Zhang is a bit removed from the operations, a little slow to ship me tea, altruistic to a fault when he's making his super high quality teas, and either playing the flute, the vertical bamboo flute, or playing the shun, which is like an ancient clay proto-ocarina from the Han Dynasty, in the evenings. Well, Ginger's got that head for business, and if I want something shipped, I'll call her. She's willing to do essentially anything that we want as long as, like, we're willing to pay the price for it and stuff. And she isn't afraid to, like, push for higher prices or do a little bit of bargaining and stuff like that. And so I see their partnership exactly the way it is. It's a dragon in the clouds and a snake in the grass. Not to make a snake sound bad, it's this idea of somebody's very grounded and very material-based, which is what we have to do when we run a business, and the other is pie in the sky, altruistic as anything can be, and that's the mythical animal that, probably doesn't even exist. That's the dragon. Together they make joy tea. So, Zhang has his factory and a little bit of leased land in Bailin, which is why I've included Bailin, because I've been there last autumn. And it's a beautiful plot. It really just reminds me of Cho's plot in Panxi. And this is where I call Bailin lesser Panxi. I call Bailin Panxi at home, because it's like, oh, you want tea from Panxi? Like, don't buy new tea from Panxi. We have Panxi at home. You get home and it's tea from Bailin. Not to date this with the meme, but it's a great meme for this. So, Ginger has that ancestral tea garden on the slopes of Taimushan Range. And so, for this tea tour, what we did is we rented a van, and we traveled from Fuding in the morning, about 45 minutes through winding roads up the mountain to Ginger's Taimushan plot. On the mountain, we were able to walk maybe half an hour through nice little paths with interspersed wilderness, a lot of bamboo. Zhang finds this wild lotus, or no, he finds a wild orchid growing, and he gets super excited, and we stop as he digs it out of the earth and says, this is really, really, really rare. He's just super excited. I love these nature walks, as I talked about in episode 2, I think. And so we get to eventually where the nice garden is, and this is the one with the Sai Cha, which is also Gongmei, the local varietal, then the Dabai Hao varietals on the two different paths, two different plots. And the garden is overlooking the slopes of Taimushan, and Zhang slows down and shows us how to pick the teas, how to pick the different grades of teas, the shapes and sizes we should be looking for. Now, this was early April. I think it was April 5th. And so we're in prime Mudan season. And for those who don't know, and I will go into another episode about this as well, the grades for white tea go like this: Silver Needle, Bai Mudan, and Shomei. And they're all the same plant. They're all the same area. You can harvest them in different seasons. What's really happening is the sizes of the leaf, the size of the buds, and the seasons in which they're picked. The Silver Needle window comes first. It's pretty short, usually in mid to late March. And then as soon as that kind of fades out, we get the Mudan Wang. And then the Mudan Ji Ping, which is the exceptional peony. And then we just get Mudan, or Bai Mudan, white peony. And then after this, we get this elephant in the room, Gong Mei. Now, Gong Mei is used to be considered the summer or the spring, late spring harvest before Shomei. But now it's being kind of eradicated from the language because Gong Mei is used way too often to refer to Sai Cha, which is a totally different cultivar, totally different varietal of tea than the Dabai House. So they're trying to remove it from the diction that's going on. But usually what happens is Gong Mei is that very late spring harvest. Now it's just being rebranded as Spring Shomei. In the autumn, we'll have two more harvests. We'll have the Bailu Shomei and just the regular Shomei. And again, I'll do a detailed analysis on this and why it's happening and how you can look for it. But what we're doing here is we have 11 foreigners learning about tea from Zhang, learning about how to pick it with one leaf. What we're looking for now is essentially 2 leaves and 1 bud. That's like that standard, that really high quality Mudan pick, that Mudan Jiping. And so if you've never picked tea before, there are a few things you need to know. You're supposed to pluck the tea. You're not supposed to cut the tea in any way. What's really natural to do when you're trying to pick tea is to use your thumbnail or use a fingernail to kind of clip the stem. But if you do this, what you're doing is you're breaking the cell's wall. You're macerating the stem, you're crushing it, and you're creating this very early enzymatic reaction that's going to brown the leaf, that's going to start this oxidization process. And what you're also doing here is you're kind of creating a blockade on the path that a lot of moisture would need when it leaves the leaf as it withers. And so don't crush it, don't clip it. What you want to do is you want to take it very gently in the pads of your thumb and your forefinger and pull it. Just pull it right off. And this is called the pluck. So at this point, the pressure is on because Zhang makes it look super easy. He shows us all the different grades and shows us what we're looking for, then gives us all a basket. And so we get into the fields, we get into the rows, and we start picking. And, we're just having a good time. We're talking, we're laughing, and everyone's just coming over to each other and saying, like, is this a good pick? Is this a good pick? Like, this one has 3 leaves. This one only has 2 leaves. And meanwhile, Jingzhi's, I think she called him her uncle, who's literally only has 1 hand, and he's just picking the Sai Cha like crazy. I have this incredible photo of him. I used it on one of the tea cakes, the green Shomei tea cakes from Zhang. And he's just so happy, and he's just like showing us all up, and it's all very embarrassing for 11 of us foreigners because he's picking way more tea than all of us. And so after about an hour of this, I think Zhang calls the mercy call and says, okay, doesn't matter how much you pick, let's all bring it together, and then we'll go back down the mountain and we'll eat some lunch. And so on the way down, we stop for lunch, and we drink some of this Yang Mei Jiu. And so Yang Mei Jiu is just like baijiu, and they just put a bunch of these local fruit called Yang Mei. I think they're waxberries. They put a bunch of waxberries in there. And another interesting thing about this mountain life is it's pretty common to, drink a beer or drink a little bit of alcohol at lunch or at dinner or something like that. And so it's kind of nice just to, after you're picking in the fields, to like drink a little bit of baijiu, a little bit of strong liquor, and then get back to it. So we drink a little bit of it, try it out, and of course sample the Fujianese food. Then we go down to the factory, and this is one of my favorite parts, and I'm going to really get into it in another episode where I talk all about the production of white tea. But essentially, Zhang walks us through this whole process of the sun withering or the air withering. He has this really cool process called the yang cha. And this is where after it withers, when it gets down to like 15% moisture content, he puts all of the tea from all the different harvests that are from all the different gardens into one big pile. And this, he says, kind of homogenizes the tea because there's some living enzymes still active in it before it totally dries out, that they can get on the same level before he passes them into the really, really dry phase. And so it's still like technically a living batch of tea. He refers to it as a rotten apple that spoils the bunch. But in this term, what we're wanting that enzymatic catalyst to kind of transform the rest of the tea into something that can be labeled as a single lot, and it's not a bunch of different flavors in a single batch. After that comes the drying process, and the air in the drying room is just fantastic. It's a beautiful factory too, really, really clean. And then comes the moment of truth where Zhang takes us out into the other room and puts all of the tea that we've harvested onto one of the racks, and we realize we've barely harvested anything. I would say maybe 300 grams of fresh tea. Zhang's looking at this and he's like, yeah, I could make like 100 grams of tea out of it maybe, but that might be a stretch. And so we realize, all of us are humbled by it, and we realize how much work goes into just picking all the white tea. Zhang also shows us a few other things because, as I mentioned earlier, he was a mechanical engineer, and so he shows us this machine. It's essentially one big cabinet with a bunch of different rows and a charcoal basin in the bottom that can charcoal roast huge batches of tea at a single time. And he says because of this, he charcoal roasts everything. A lot of people will only charcoal roast their silver needle or their high-quality baimudan because they have to do it in single batches and single baskets where you can only do 1 kilogram, 2 kilograms at a time. Zhang says with his machine that he's designed, he can do 30 kilograms at a time. And so he just passes everything through there, which is really, really cool. And that's one thing I appreciate and why I pressed the cakes from Zhang. So finally what we do, we get up into the tasting room and we taste the teas from the different gardens. We taste the teas from Bailin, we taste the teas from the Taimushan garden that we were just at. We taste the Saicha and the Gongmei. And it's just a really great experience to just be surrounded by the tea in all levels, where you're picking it, you're seeing it made, and then you're drinking it finally. And so this whole experience was fantastic just to get this synthesis of what tea is like in these regions. And again, we see two different people coming together from two different parts of Fuding, from Bailin, from Fuding, and from Taimushan. And they're doing work together, and they're kind of blending it here and there. And so some of the tea is from Bailin, some of the tea is from Taimushan. And so you'll see in these regions like Panxi, Bailin, which I called Lesser Panxi, and then Taimushan. These are all very, very similar. The one that is very different, I'll get into the next episode, and this is Guangling. This is far up north near Zhejiang. Another thing that's different is the truly organic and truly wild Taimushan tea, which is a whole other element in itself. And for that one, I had a really long tangent in episode 2 about, so if you're curious about some of that stuff, you can look back there. I'll bring it back up in our varietals conversation that will happen next, but again, next episode, what I really want to do is I want to get up to Guilin and follow this one guy named Wu. And Wu has one of my favorite stories of us, all the people here. He has my least favorite tea, but he has my favorite story. And so this goes back to the idea, like, you can't just buy tea from the guy with the best story. But I think Zhang's story is pretty cool. I think Ginger is pretty awesome. I really love hanging out with them in Fuding, and I can't wait to go back. And I can't wait to invite more friends there because they're super, super friendly. And one really, really funny thing before we go. When I was there last time, everyone was drinking Wui Yan Cha. And I was so confused by it because they're all drinking like Zhenyan Yan Cha, which is really good. And they were still drinking the white tea, but literally everyone was obsessed with it. And it could just be like, I didn't realize that the first time because everyone's trying to sell me the white tea, but maybe it's the culture has that confluence, that transfer of ideas. A lot of places that are production regions, they'll only drink their own tea, and so it was pretty fun to see them branching out. Anyways, thanks for joining me on this tea tour. Thank you for all of my tangents. Thank you for indulging the astrology and the zodiacs and the history of Fuzhou and all these different tea tours that I want to do in the future. I'm just getting pretty excited about it, so Again, this is Derek from One River Tea. Thanks for catching this episode of Tea Soup. Until next time, brew happy.